This morning on This Week, redistricting in Illinois.
Governor Pritzker, you sold out.
Republicans strike back after Democrats push through a new plan for Illinois representation. Plus, the new man on the job.
We really are looking for stability.
Moline's new city administrator starts tomorrow. What we know about Bob Vitas. And the FDA approves the first Alzheimer's drug in a generation. This couple were guinea pigs.
There were instances that we kind of thought were senior moments, and they were happening way too often.
Their experience is part of your health this week.
From WQAD News 8, this is News 8 This Week with Jim Mertens.
And get ready for a fight over lines. Democrats drew up new legislative districts for Illinois. The governor signed it. Now Republicans have filed a lawsuit to stop the redistricting from becoming law. In a way, we should have seen this coming as Illinois continues to argue over creating an independent committee that would take redistricting out of the hands of the legislature. That's our top story this morning on News 8 This Week. Illinois Republicans are crying foul in the loudest way possible.
This is a blatant effort to kill democracy in Illinois, and it will not go unanswered.
Republicans say the redrawing of Illinois legislative districts, called redistricting, was done with little public input and heavily favors the people who drew up the lines, Democrats.
Their sole goal throughout this process was to retain control of Springfield, to keep the stranglehold on Illinois and Illinoisans. Governor Pritzker refused to hear the voices of people telling him that this was a bad idea and this is a bad map.
And here is the map. Now, here in western Illinois, they did the best to try to preserve the Quad Cities as all one House district. To the north and to the south, larger districts that are representing more rural areas. This cluster of colors here in northeast Illinois, obviously the Chicago area. Democrats say that these lines actually preserve minority representation and follow the strictures of the Federal Voting Rights Act.
Well, I think what we did in Illinois is adopt a map that reflects the diversity of the state. Urban and rural, racial and ethnic minorities are fairly represented in the map.
Close to home, the Quad City District, the area in green, would include much of Moline and Rock Island down to the Milan Bottoms. Southeast Moline would be in a different district. That district, seen here in light blue, is the long, narrow strip stretching from Moline through Galesburg and down to Macomb.
I think for the next 10 years we'll be in a good position to really reflect what we're all about here in Illinois.
Not so, say Republicans. For one thing, Democrats aren't using official census data, which was delayed because of the COVID-19 outbreak.
Using inaccurate, flawed data clearly deviates from the practice of one person, one vote.
So Republicans filed suit this week in federal court, saying residents were robbed of a fair and transparent process.
The final maps were introduced less than 24 hours before they were called for a vote. Finally, they passed it in the 11th hour, citing an end of June deadline that we all know is fake.
The end of that June deadline is often cited by Democrats, but it's actually a deadline for political resolution to redistricting. If Democrats had no plan, a non-political group would draw the lines, and that's what Republicans are actually calling for in their federal lawsuit. So how can Democrats defend the new state redistricting? And joining us is Rock Island County Democratic Chair, State Representative Mike Halpin. I know you had hearings locally in regards to redistricting, but still it seemed to be a backdoor deal that was hidden by Democrats.
No, Jim, not at all. This is a process where we took input from our communities throughout the state. We had an in-person hearing here in the Quad Cities. We also had a virtual hearing for folks in this area to be able to participate and make their views known. Honestly, there weren't too many people that participated locally, but one thing that we heard was that we want to make sure to maintain the diversity of our representation here in the state of Illinois and make sure that carries through.
Well, diversity is really a big deal when it comes to the Chicago area because you have so many ethnicities in certain neighborhoods. And as you know, 10 years ago, underrepresentation and making sure that a Hispanic community was well represented actually ended up in the court system. So, I mean, that was a critical issue. What's the critical issue as far as Western Illinois? Was it making sure that rural areas were represented? And why is the Quad Cities pretty much just one district for the House?
So rural representation is certainly important, but I am going to push back on about racial and ethnic diversity. We have a strong African American and Latino population here in the Quad Cities, and it was important to our local activists to make sure those communities were not split up here in the area. And one thing I did notice about this map is that it does keep those communities here together in the Quad Cities. And I think that's important and can't be overlooked. Diversity is not just a Chicago issue, it's an issue throughout the state of Illinois. But turning back to your observation about rural communities, it's also important to keep rural communities together and make sure they have representation for their interests and they're not diluted. And I think if you look at the state maps that we've passed, those goals are met as well.
Well, that one district that you do kind of notice, it goes from Moline down through Galesburg all the way to Macomb, a very slender district. Can you explain the rationale behind that one?
Well, I think overall it's important that we understand we want to keep those communities of interest together. I do think that Macomb and Galesburg and the Quad Cities share some university populations, some manufacturing populations, other urban populations that are consistent and are important to keep together.
Part of the lawsuit from Republicans says that you're not using census numbers. You're using numbers from the American Community Survey instead. They say it's not as accurate and it just isn't fair. Now, we know that the census was delayed because of COVID. Would it have been more important to wait for those census numbers to come out?
I think it was most important to make sure to meet our constitutional obligation by the end of session. And I think the claims about the data being off are certainly not accurate. There was testimony at hearings during this process that, as far as they can tell, the experts can tell, of course, the deviation is minuscule, if any. And I think it was important that we met the timeline, got maps passed in a way that does reflect the diversity of the state.
Illinois is now a fully open state. COVID-19 is now clearly in our rearview mirror. What do you take from it, COVID that is, the restrictions, the emergency proclamations from the governor? What do you take that as a legislator, that the governor didn't really include the legislature that much in some of these decisions over the past year? Is that something that maybe pushed back or maybe looked at a little closely if there's ever another future emergency like we saw over the last year?
We can certainly look at ways to adjust how we respond to this, but the reality is the legislature is a deliberative body, as you know, and it takes some time in a lot of ways to produce legislation. We authorize the governor to make these type of decisions in this type of emergency. That's his role. And I think for the most part, he did that job very well. I think you and I have talked about, and I've talked to other people about criticisms with the unemployment insurance department and some other issues. But on the whole, I think he made a lot of responsible decisions at the very beginning that prevented Illinois from going on an even steeper curve of the spread of this disease.
You look back at the last 18 months and what a different world it is, what a different nation it is, and what a different Illinois it is. What did you hear from constituents, and what are you still hearing as far as COVID is concerned?
I think there are some people that are still cautious about going out and being around a lot of people, but the data certainly shows that if you're vaccinated, the odds of being seriously harmed by this disease going forward are much smaller. And I think it is time to start getting back out in the world and doing the things that we're used to doing, the things that we weren't able to do last summer, we can start doing again today. What I hear most is that people are very excited to get back to that normal.
Our thanks to Rock Island County Democratic Chair and State Representative Mike Halpin. And our discussion continues online and on your mobile device. Just type the search words "this week" on our website. Use our mobile app. We've posted more information and important links for today's topic. Plus, you can listen to our entire interview with Representative Halpin on our podcast. Just click on This Week at WQAD.com. And still ahead on This Week, improving the look of a president.
Once again, we gather to pay tribute to a great American, a beloved Iowan, and a West Branch native.
This week, Iowa decided to give Herbert Hoover a helping hand that will help transform this West Liberty landmark. It's just ahead on News 8 This Week.